My name is Glen Hougan. I teach, I'm an industrial designer, and I teach at NASCAD. And actually, I have been looking at design for health and aging, and specifically around design for an aging population. The reason I'm focusing on that is as I get older, I also see products that are just not very well designed for an older population. And there was a real need to look at some of the issues. So I'd done a bunch of research, and some of the research I originally started with, I developed an aging suit. And this was originally done at Loughborough University, but it was a suit you could put on to simulate what it would feel like to be older. And of course, it became my ageist suit because it really just reinforced every negative stereotype about getting older. So I moved on from the suit, but I was really interested in ageism. And I went to the Mayo Clinic, and I was interested in why we don't engage an older population as much, or if they tell us why we're not seeing their input as much. So part of the Mayo Clinic was actually looking at going into people's homes and seeing what they were doing. And it was really around adaptations. So we all know Carl Fredricksen from the movie Up. And of course that has some has a classic adaptation that you would find of balls on the end of assistive devices to help it slide easier. The one on the right, I guess, the white things, is actually my father-in-law, and he had marked up his screen door with correction fluid, because he had actually correction fluid for the typewriter. This was a typewriter correction fluid. So he wouldn't walk into it. And these are all, as a designer, there's these insights into certain things that sometimes seem silly, but always have a really good sort of fundamental design foundation. And I think we've all walked into a screen door in our life. I don't care what age you are. And for some reason, this was a really smart design hack. So I'm interested in these adaptations that people do to make their life easier, and really kind of senior-centered ones that, let me just move this to the next one. Sorry, I'm just trying to move this here. There it is. But I think fundamentally is, even when you look at Carl Fredricksen, there is very much, this man is actually 72, 73, 74. So think of him around my colleague John's age. And I don't see John looking like this. So this has all the very stereotypical elements of an ageist viewpoint of an older population. Out of touch, tweed and things like that. Bow tie, some of them may wear bow ties, but again, it's very much a stereotypical view, an ageist view of that population group. And I always think that we have to be aware of our ageist attitudes. And what's been interesting also is healthcare and healthcare organizations are some of the ageist in the research is showing them quite ageist in terms of that. So it's something that we all have to be aware of. And I won't go too much into it, but it has colored everything. And I do find myself constantly having ageist views. And also, just because you're an older person doesn't mean you don't also have ageist views. So I'm looking at this thing called elder speak. And this is the idea of, you know, how we interact or how we view people. Oh, that's a pretty sweater, isn't it? It's that exaggerated tone. What I'm finding in design is sort of this exaggerated design that we get. And it's these kind of products that might have that whiff of a hospital, or these technologies that are just very large, really kind of, if you want to look at it, really cranky, stupid, and tacky. And somehow it's a reference, there's some semiotics of kind of how we might view this population. And it gets reflected into a lot of these unaesthetic, very, very ungainly, ugly products that we seem to design for them. So I've been really interesting, and I think it's really elder speak and elder design. I'm finding that there's a lot of elder design. And in my experience is when I talk to people to understand really what they want, they don't want this whiff of a hospital. They want something that has more meaning in their life, and that's also very aesthetically pleasing. Because as you get older, it doesn't mean that somehow you just like bad taste. I don't, again, there's this feeling that we need to start to designing around that. And I've been looking at, where is it here? Oops. looking at how we view people and how people really are. And I think the idea that Carl Fredrickson is maybe there's a better representation of who this person was in the movie Up. And in reality, probably the person on the right is more a reflection of how people in their 70s might be. They're not wearing tweed, they're out and about, they're just as hip and cool as anybody else. And I think we need to have products reflect it. And I think what's happening is we're just not understanding how this population group lives if we're not part of that population group. So I do a lot of things called contextual design. And I work with a partner where we will go in and just interview people and see how products are being used in their homes. And once you get the contextual and see how things are reflected and how people actually live, you start to design then better products and services and things for them. I'm going to be going through this fairly quick, so we just kind of maybe finish in time here. But when I go in, I look at 4 main areas. Do people know the AEIOU? It's lovely. It's because it's perfect. It's all of your vowels. The idea that you need to understand their environments, who are these users, the objects that they use, the activities, and their interactions that they have. And those are kind of the stepping stones when I go into places. Now, the adaptations originally got started with this company in the States called Herman Miller, and they had developed this system in hospitals. And I'll just show you, I went into a hospital, and this was in Michigan, and started documenting everything, the changes that they were making in the hospital. And out of that, of course, Herman Miller was interested in what are the changes they were making to the systems we sold to them, but what are the opportunities to design it. And in the hospitals, I did not talk to the doctors. I actually talked to the people on the ground floor. And it was the nurses, the staff, the technicians, and going in and shadowing and observing all their environments. And when you do that, when you actually get into this contextual thing, you start to see things that you don't notice if you're not in the environment. So you start to notice the role of housekeeping in the healthcare system. And in reality, sort of the research started to show that housekeeping, the people that are going into your room and cleaning, are not there to talk about your health. They're there to talk about just everyday things and the value that they had in terms of interacting with the patients was a different level than the doctor or the nurse coming in. And the value in making these people feel comfortable in these environments was key. That was one of the main sort of insights. And I think you get these insights when you start to go into people's homes. So that was the initiation that I started to develop around approach the Mayo Clinic. I said, are you interested in how people are adapting things? Because the Mayo Clinic was interested and they knew that healthcare and aging in place that was going to be in the home. So they were interested in this. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the Mayo Clinic. It's in Rochester, New York. Very well funded, one of the top hospitals in the world, and they had developed the Center for Innovation, and they were looking at the idea of how do you innovate healthcare, and they had set up the Hale Lab. I'd approached them interestingly for 2 things. I was interested in following up on my Herman Miller work and actually going to people's homes and looking at adaptations, and I actually approached them about looking at ageism within healthcare. Interesting, they did not want to look at ageism in healthcare. So they wanted this. So I was looking specifically for not commercial products, but these do-it-yourself adaptations, because as a designer, it was really interesting in what people were doing to make their life easier. So I was looking at that. And I was looking at these things as a designer of things they were putting together to do stuff. And it was really functional items. So at this point, it was not about technology. And this was about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think it was hard to document because they had to document it for me, or I had to document it. So if you're looking at these 3 items and you're looking at showering, can you figure out a product there? 3 items. And I'll show you what people come up with. And what they were doing, it was a functional item to help them wash their hair and scrub their back. So from a design perspective, it's crude, but man, this is some smart thinking. And it seems to be a lot smarter than the products that might be out there. And in fact, the products that are out there are very difficult for even me and you to use. Now, I could not navigate some of those products. So again, it's these user-centered hacks that people do give us insight into some very low cost, functional things that people are trying to design because they're not seeing it in the products, or the products are too expensive. So from a design perspective, this was gold for me. This was total gold. So I went out and I did two things. I went on had people document stuff, or I went on online, and they had to send me images. So I documented it on Pinterest. And if you look up product hacks for seniors, you can find these things on Pinterest. This is not just for aging, but for other things. I then started to look at how do you determine what they are. So I looked at, there was four main things happening where people were adapting. They were they were modifying things, so they're changing something to make it better. They're repurposing, they're finding things and converting it. They're inventing things. And also they're signaling. So they're putting on these warning signs. And I looked at this sort of framework within every part of the home and looked at what sort of an adaptation it was. I'll show you some of the results. And I went in, and the results were based on when I went into Charterhouse, which was the Mayo Clinic retirement. And I put the call out saying, I'm looking for an adaptation. And usually it was males that would say, oh, I've got an adaptation I've done, or something kind of interesting. And when I would go into their home, they thought they only had one, but usually I'd find 10 different things that they had done. So some of what was interesting is you start to see adaptations by caregivers starting to look at things and all of the things people are doing in their home and what we can learn from them. Not necessarily using technology adaptations, because it was hard to take pictures of at that time, but all of these people were using technology, at least had cell phones at this time. And I would say that has only accelerated in the last year or two. But what they were starting to do is create dignity. So this was he actually created this for other people. It was a bib for a spouse who had dementia, and he found it embarrassing she was wearing this child bib. And he developed something that she could wear around and clip onto just any napkin or serviette that they had. And he was making it for other people. He had actually a production line at home. There was other people with limited mobility, and they're starting to make things. So all of this group of people had specific functions that they were trying to address. There was people that were Mr. Fix-It. And again, I will say that I didn't have too many women coming in, and these, if you noticed, I had about 15. Most of them, of course, were professional white males. So what we're not finding, what I didn't uncover, was people in low income, or people from women, or people of color, or indigenous. So I wasn't getting their voices. So I was getting them very specific professional voices. A lot of older white males like myself who have no problem telling their story. But their story was interesting. You know, what they were doing were these things of, adjusting their mattresses and keeping it up high so they can get up quite easy. All around sort of functional items. Things that were designed for them, an emergency thing that you couldn't use. He was lying in bed. You think he can walk, and there was a cord on it that you had to pull straight. That the only way to do that emergency was pulling it straight down. So again, even the things that we design that we might help them couldn't even be used by them. And this was classic. He had a hard time. This is the technology. He had a hard time keeping his pointer, his cursor on things he was doing. And he had developed a system where he could take it and put it in this black box. And I looked online, and they were selling something that would do the same thing for like $300. And this guy invented it. He had figured it out. So again, these innovations that people are happening. At the end of the day, people there was a lot of publicity around it. New York Times reported on it. ARP started to take some of the stuff I was doing about these hacks and started to develop them. The Wall Street Journal started to look at some of these hacks, soap and a rope. The one interesting thing is the Wall Street Journal asked me for the top 10 hacks. And you notice on that article a few years ago, they did 9. They did not take the one that was the best hack that I was seeing, the best adaptation. And it was around people adapting their medication management. And I always think that's a real interesting thing. The kind of goofy ones they liked, but the one that actually was a critique of the system, they were about the hacks they were doing about medication management, they did not put in because it didn't quite, I think it didn't quite fit into a narrative of these other hacks. And so I looked at this, and you start to identify why they're doing it, how they're doing it, not necessarily using technology at this point, because they wanted control. These were people living at home. They didn't, and you can start to see where it's happening. So out of that, just in finishing off, I developed products based on what people are telling me and what the hacks of what things are happening in their home. They know kind of the solutions. They know the problems. I just listen to them. And then, because I have some design skills, try to design things, take it back to them and show them. So this was one of them, the medication management. And this is what kind of came out of it. It was this idea that people wanted some control about certain things. The idea that if you notice on what people were putting elastic bands in homes around their medication management because they were worried about pills falling out. So you design it, the idea these bands can go on it. And again, these insights are something that are key for me as a designer because I don't know the problems. They do. And all of these are based on information that they gave me or hacks that they had developed. The idea that, you know where this is kept? This is kept in their drawers. They're not keeping it in a medicine cabinet, it's in their kitchen drawers. So you design something that actually can fit in a drawer. And they were putting both types of pills on it. And they had different sizes of pills that need to fill in it. Then it starts to be color coded on the top, where you can have the color for either blue for one person, so they're not mixing their medicines. Then they wanted a case. They wanted something where it's a little bit more dignified, where they can keep all this stuff. They want to go to their grandkids or they want to go to their doctor. They could take something. So all of these ideas, and again, I apologize for kind of quickly going through this, but all of these ideas are just things when I observe people in their environment and watch what they're doing. And I think as designers and or as people, we're trying to solve their problems. And I think that's part of it, but it's also listening to what their actual problems are and seeing how they're solving it, because people are solving their own problems in some ways, in some kind of, and a lot of times, sometimes it's these hacks that happen. And all of the problems that they're trying to solve are all around dignity issues. People want dignity in their life. And I don't care what age you are, whether you're younger or older, people want dignity. And a lot of the products and a lot of the services and even the idea of technology that we're starting to do is not things to enhance that dignity, but to maybe to control them. So I will finish, and I apologize for kind of going through that quick, but I want to quickly kind of, well, I guess we're off track. So, and maybe we won't take questions and I can take it after so we can get the other.
Yeah.
Thank you.